All right, let's get into it. Today we're talking about Carl Rogers, one of the most important psychologists of the 20th century. But here's the thing. His story doesn't start in a lab or a lecture hall. Nope, it starts on a farm with a young guy who is way more interested in soil than in the human mind.
So when you look at this, you see two totally different worlds, right? On one side, you've got the scientific farmer, all about control, data, and making sure plants grow perfectly. On the other, the humanistic psychologist, all about empathy, acceptance, and letting people find their own way. They seem like polar opposites. But here's the kicker. The person on the right actually started out as the person on the left.
And that's the big puzzle we're going to unpack in this explainer. I mean, how does that happen? This isn't just switching jobs. It's a complete shift in how you see the world and what makes living things, well, live. To get the answer, we've got to go all the way back to the beginning.
So let's dive into his early life, because the seeds of everything he'd later become were planted in some pretty unlikely soil.
You've got to picture this. Carl Rogers grew up in a big, very devoutly religious family. But it wasn't exactly warm and fuzzy. His parents were, in his own words, pretty controlling. This meant his childhood was super isolated. He ended up being a really shy, sensitive kid who got teased a lot and didn't really have any friends outside his family.
And this list, this really shows you just how strict his world was. Think about it. Dancing, playing cards, even drinking soda. All of these things that we'd see as just normal parts of life were completely forbidden. His entire world revolved around the Bible and hard work. That's it.
So what does an isolated kid on a farm do? He focuses on the world that's right in front of him. Rogers dove headfirst into scientific agriculture, watching everything, taking meticulous notes. He got fascinated with figuring out the exact conditions, the necessary and sufficient conditions for plants and animals to really thrive. Now, you're going to want to remember that phrase because it becomes incredibly important later on.
Okay, so let's move on. After a childhood defined by all these rigid rules, Rogers' entire world was about to get blown wide open. Just look at this timeline for a second. The change is incredibly fast. In 1922, he's at a religious conference. By 24, he's all set to become a minister. But then, bam! Just 2 years later, he's out of the seminary, and a few years after that, he has a PhD in psychology. So what on earth happened in that short amount of time? What was the big catalyst?
It all came down to this 6-month trip to China. It was the first time in his life he was away from his family's control, exposed to totally different cultures and ideas. And it changed everything. That shy, awkward kid started to become a confident, independent thinker. He realized he didn't have to just accept a set of beliefs someone else gave him. He could figure things out for himself.
So, having left that world of rigid dogma behind, Rogers jumps into the field of psychology. But he wasn't just going to fall in line. He looked at the established ways of doing things, like Freudian psychoanalysis, and thought, you know what? Something's missing here. And what he came up with was, well, it was a total game changer. He called it client-centered therapy. The idea was to flip the whole model on its head. Instead of a therapist diagnosing a patient, Rogers said the client, and he was very specific about that word, already has the answers inside them. The therapist's job isn't to fix them, it's to create the right environment for them to grow and heal themselves.
Now, an idea this big doesn't just pop into your head fully formed. It grew over time. First, he was really influenced by another therapist, Otto Rank, who showed him how powerful empathy and acceptance could be. That led him to develop his non-directive method, where the therapist takes a back seat. But eventually, he had this huge breakthrough. He realized it wasn't about the technique at all. The therapy was the relationship. That genuine human connection was the real magic ingredient for growth.
And this is where it all comes full circle. This is how that scientific farmer from Illinois completely changed how we think about the human mind.
See, that observant, meticulous kid who took notes on crops, he never really went away. While a lot of other therapy was based on theories and interpretations, Rogers was different. He insisted, he demanded that his ideas be tested with hard, scientific, data-driven research. He wanted to prove that this tender-minded approach actually worked.
And here's the ultimate proof. The entire psychology community basically stood up and said, wow, this guy's onto something. They gave him their first ever Distinguished Scientific Contribution Award. He got their highest scientific honor not just for his ideas about empathy, but for the hard-headed science he used to back them up, a skill he learned on a farm in Illinois.
So, in the end, this is what he found. Those necessary and sufficient conditions for human growth he'd been looking for his whole life, it wasn't about diagnosing problems or digging up the past.
The most powerful ingredient was the relationship itself, an environment of real, genuine empathy and unconditional acceptance. Just like a plant needs sunlight and water to grow, a person needs connection and understanding to truly flourish. The farmer had found his answer.
Which leaves us with a pretty powerful question for ourselves. Rogers spent his entire life figuring out what humans need to thrive. So, what about you? What are the necessary conditions that you need to really, truly grow?